morning, everyone.
Good morning, Cynthia.
My name is Cynthia, and this is my spring 2017 report and last board presentation as a fellow. Before I came into the fellowship, I was like a solitary bioluminescent plankton. Apparently, that's what individual plankton are called, with no movement around me. Enough. They all have the capacity to make light, but they're so small that they can only be seen in community with each other. By processes not entirely understood, these simple creatures ignite into light when jostled. They convert the energy of movement into the energy of radiance. He goes on to say that as followers of Jesus, we have the light of Christ inside of us, and so we are theoluminescent. But before the fellowship, I had never been part of a community that harnessed its theoluminescent power for the kingdom. A community that let itself be jostled and churned up in their particular place, and that, like bioluminescent plankton, would use the energy of movement caused by living on mission with each other and turn it into the energy of radiance. By God's grace, these past 2 years, I have seen you all glow, and I have learned to do it myself. Here are 3 reasons. Reason number 1, I learned to glow because I had the opportunity to explore and learn a lot about myself. I got to figure out what kinds of things filled or drained my oxygen tank and what it looked and felt like to be faithful in the little and the big things either way. Thankfully, my role as sponsor assistant means that I still get the opportunity to have my hands in a lot of different projects and departments. This past trimester, I set out to help implement the COO process by creating 4 different documents, one of them being a visual of the COO process and its rhythms. I enjoyed creating these documents because I knew that it would make the implementation of this new process a lot easier and better for our staff. I also set out to help implement the leader color scorecard by meeting with Elisa and Gigi, brainstorming, creating a first draft, and presenting it to the directors. I met with Elisa, had that initial meeting, and then the project got owned by its different departments, and so I stepped out. My other professional rock was to organize Juan's life by creating a system for his Google Drive and by integrating all of his contacts into the executive contact list. I'm sure this is no surprise to anyone, but Juan is a social creature, and his contact list definitely reflects that. Last I counted, he had over 2,300 contacts, of which we've combed through 997 of them, so we're about 43% done with this project. Along the way, I got to be a part of the team that pulled off the first ever Cultivate. We had 13 registered participants from 5 different cities. These 3 days were a really great reminder of our vision, of why we do what we do, and of the great team we get to do it with. Reason number 2, I learned to glow through the fellowship because it gave me a safe place to learn how to fail. Not just to fail, but to learn how to. I am a typical firstborn who loves authority, rule following, and learning from other people's mistakes so that I don't make them again. Example number 1 is I vowed to never dress my daughters in matching and or ugly outfits, and I have learned from my mother's mistakes. No, but seriously, my avoidance, like I was like 8 in that picture. Why am I still wearing my sister's outfit? Anyways, my avoidance of failure brought me into the fellowship with a deep fear of it and a lack of experience with it. Enter Love in Action 2017 with Cherry Hills Community Church. This year consisted of 6 different projects over 3 days, 23 volunteers, and $1,500 budget. I owned the projects on the cross-purpose side and worked with Kim Harris to plan and coordinate it all. We successfully pulled off 4 out of the 6 projects and logistically bombed 2 of them. Long story short, we didn't do a great job of communicating with our volunteers or our hosts before or the day of. And in an effort to avoid micromanaging, I swung in the other direction and was way too hands-off. Someone once said that failure should be our teacher, not our undertaker. And Love in Action provided me with the opportunity to live this out. Turns out my default is not to learn from failure, but to blame, make excuses, and experience shame. Thankfully, I worked with and for some incredibly gracious people who believe that failure is our teacher, who reminded me of what's true, and who helped me not just do damage control, but actually learn from it all. Reason number 3, I learned to glow because the fellowship allowed me to both embrace and satisfy my nostalgia. Julie Beck, in an article in The Atlantic titled When Nostalgia Was a Disease, talks about how during the 30 Years' War, at least 6 soldiers were discharged from the Spanish Army of Flanders with el mal de corazón, or nostalgia, Because soldiers might suddenly contract a severe case of the disease if they heard the Swiss milking song, Hugh ran, its playing was forbidden and punishable by death. In 1733, there was an outbreak of nostalgia in the Russian army on their way to Germany. The general told the troops that the first one to come down with the nostalgic virus would get buried alive. He actually made good on his promise a couple times, which nipped that right in the bud. When nostalgia finally made its way to the United States after the Civil War, the scared out of them tactic was replaced with the shame out of them. American military doctor Theodore Calhoun thought nostalgia was something to be ashamed of, that those who suffered from it were unmanly, weak-willed, and idle. He proposed curing it with a healthy dose of public ridicule and belief. Even though the last mention of nostalgia on a death certificate was in 1918, and the prevailing view on it has definitely changed over the years, I have struggled with finding the right way of viewing the sense of loss I've experienced after moving from the Dominican to the States. The fellowship gave me permission to grieve and embrace what it means to no longer be at home in the old country, while simultaneously making me feel at home in the new. One of the ways I have done this is by exploring my Latina identity. This past trimester, this looked like reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 500-page Nobel Prize-winning novel, 100 Years of Solitude, in Spanish. Giving a chapel talk on Latino culture and mindsets with Juan, and going back to the Dominican for the first time in 3 years. You all encouraged me to process not just through the geographical dislocation I've experienced, but smaller things, like my season as a coach. Last week, I had the privilege of walking across the finish line with 5 of my original 7 leaders. One of them a community graduate, one of them walked as a community and career graduate, and 3 as full career and community graduates. I'm really glad I had the opportunity to be a coach, and I'm sure that I will look back at this season and miss parts of it. Jen Pollock Michelle talked about how in our humanness we are given to nostalgia. We are given to nostalgia, and how it's not just about geographical dislocation, but how it's a word to signal spiritual hunger, a word to suggest a world existing beyond the present one, before the present one. She goes on to say that as a Teal Medicine community, nostalgia is a right appraisal of our story. A perfect world has fallen from grace. But we do not blithely accept the cosmic rupture of death and disease, even the disappointments of the everyday. We hold on to the sense that the world should be different than it is, better than it is. And so we harness our theoluminescent power for the kingdom. We let ourselves be jostled and churned up in our neighborhoods. We turn the energy of movement into the energy of radiance. And by God's grace, we glow. Thank you for teaching me how to be.